Okay, so now we can share our dharmas with our presenters by asking them questions or sharing our thoughts. And I'd like to ask the first question, and then I'll leave it open. My first question is to Dave. Dave, Ling Chi talks about what you call the shock sort of tactics. Um, in our days, you also mentioned that that will not be very acceptable. It would not be a good practice to hit somebody on the head or to, although when you go to some dojos, like my daughter is a karateka and her, a karate master, Kaicho, he has his bamboo, stick where when they're doing their zazen, he feels free to, shock. So, but what would be another way of using shock tactic in our days that it is acceptable or that could be acceptable and we can use as a tool for shocking us out of slumber?
So, a couple of things. Yeah, actually, I mean, in that context where she's going into that place and that's one of their like methods that they use, it would be fitting. A couple of things that occurred to me though. One is when I work with people, one of my main things is looking for and trying to lift up people's strengths. And so, just as an example, in the past, when I've done groups, I'll ask people to go around and share a strength that they've used in the past few days. And what I found, because we often don't think in terms of strengths, right? We think in terms of the deficits, the things that are wrong that need to be fixed. So it dawned on me in kind of the context of this sort of practice that's actually kind of a shocking question, to be asked to identify what a strength is. What I've seen happen is that as we go around, people will struggle a little bit to identify the strength, but they'll start talking about a challenge, and then we can work through and find the strengths that they use to get through that challenge. Whereas the old habitual way, we might just go around and talk about the challenge, and might, kind of get caught more and more back into our narrative and our storyline. So to me, that's a form of a quote unquote good shock that takes us out of our habitual thinking and acting. Another is asking, so when people are talking about maybe just a situation and they're caught in kind of the narrative, the storyline, it can be appropriate to ask if it fits in the conversation and it's not invalidating to do it. It can be appropriate to ask, where does that experience land in your body? So that's actually a tool that kind of comes from some somatic trauma type work, but it's about getting out of our heads and finding the sensations, which Ruth actually spoke to that when she gave her story. And it's a way of course, it's always invitational, so it's not forceful, it's invitational, but it's a way of reorienting to our experience and getting out again out of that story and narrative. So those are just a couple of quick examples off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Dave, my thinking is, what was the purpose of doing that? The purpose is to get his students to be more aware of their spiritual path. I think in these times, I think maybe we use life to do that teaching. May the next time a student like comes up to Ruth with saying or things that are maybe somewhat offensive, May we use that as a shock to guide us in our spiritual path. When you hear of somebody you love who has an illness, may we use that as a tool to help us see things more clearly and to be able to gain wisdom. So we don't need sticks. Life has plenty of sticks. Let's use them.
Yes.
So true. And that was really a big part of where I was going with that. Like the fact that life, I mean, the shocks will happen. That's part of life. And, we can use life situations as koan practice. So that the situation arises and we can open into it. And, but again, much the same way as Ruth shared with her story.
Ruth bowing in. As a matter of fact, when you were asking that question, Elena, and what I had in my notes that I meant to say and didn't was that was a stick. That experience was a shout. It threw me totally off kilter and brought me back to that emptiness within myself. So yeah, exactly.
And Peter, how do we, knowing that life hits us with sticks every day, and we don't need a physical, wooden stick to bring us back into reality. How do we come to be what you say, free, truly free in a sort of monastic kind of way, from the attachment of trying to run away from our reality?
I would say that through sitting meditation, through the idea of letting go, how do we do that?
Because I'm thinking, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, because I'm thinking, when you say, the person left home, but is on the path, is consistently on the path. A person did not leave home and is or is not on the path. But so how can I be on the path, even with all this suffering within me, even with all these sticks hitting me on my back? Even with my desire to run away from the pain of this.
Yes, because the whole idea is dealing with all of those things with direct experience through meditation, through contemplation, both of those things that work together, like I said, like bookends that support each other. So through, I think Thich Nhat Hanh talks about embracing your anger like a baby and dealing with it that way. And I think all of those different aspects of negative emotions that I mentioned in the talk, they can be dealt with through the sitting meditation and through observing what's going on in the mind and then letting it go and dealing with the burning coals that are beneath us on a daily basis. And oftentimes we kind of push them away and kind of forget about them, but those sticks kind of bring our minds back. When I say a crossword, when I have a reaction that may not be appropriate, that can be like a stick. Wait a minute, I need to really evaluate what I'm doing and saying, and address that and change that within myself. So, does that answer the question?
Oh yes.
I hope.
There are no right or wrong answers.
Right,
Everything's good. Everything's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fat Boy, I'm bowing in. So, Peter, I was thinking about, obviously the person who leaves home and stays on the path, that would be, the easy monastic, leaving everything behind and so forth. And then the person who stays home in the literal sense, which is the lay person, could also be on the path. And so I was thinking, though, in your questions, when you were talking about leaving home, what is that? And the image that came to my mind is that, a hurricane, and then there's the eye in that storm. So everything's going on, life, right? All those sticks and shouting and all of that going on around us. But if we can maintain that calm in the storm, that's home. If you don't leave home, that home, then you'll always be on the path, wherever you are. So that's what just came to my mind.
Right, right.
Yeah, I want to say something. Is that do you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dave. Yes.
Yeah, about two things. The thing about the shock therapy. The using the stick is a raw form of the shock technique. We can shock in many ways. We don't need to use a stick. For example, at the beginning, the Zen master shout and use a stick to shock the student, but the other master later use the koan to shock the student. For example, the koan like when you see the Buddha, kill him. That is a shock technique. Or the other Zen master to burn the Buddha statue in the winter. That is also another kind of shock technique. To remove the attachment of the student to the form of the Buddha, and then to go back to their own Buddha nature and develop. That is the shock technique. So nowadays we can use the language, we can use a different thing for the shock technique. And about the living home, to become the monk, there is in Buddhism, we have three kinds of home. The first is material home. That's the house where we live. The second is the home of design, the house of design, the house of hatred, and the house of ignorance. That is the second home. The third home is the form world, the design world, the form world, and the formless world. As the free from reincarnation, free from the go back and forth because of our karma. That is three form of home. So in case of Faplan, she stay at her home. She practice that she perfectly. She transform her house become a temple. So it doesn't matter where the person lives, but if the person practice, that place is a temple. But we don't. But for the person who leaves their house, go into the temple, but still could not transform their desire, the hatred, and the ignorance, that person still be at home. So the home here is not physical home, material home, but the spiritual home. Thank you.
Thank you, Tay. Heather?
Yeah. in speaking about shock, it strikes me that often a flash of honesty or truthfulness comes to us as a shock. That's very valuable in practice. And I'm thinking of that experience in meditation sometimes of, I guess we would talk about maybe a flash of insight or a flash of wisdom that appears and brings us something that we just weren't aware of before. Sometimes a truthfulness about ourselves. I'd say I'd also have had that experience when someone speaks really honestly and particularly about something that may be taboo to talk about, or something that perhaps has been avoided in a relationship. To have it spoken honestly can be very shocking. And I'm also thinking that experience comes about in viewing art, that often art that speaks to us in some way shocks us, in some way cuts through our preconceptions, or it reveals something about our way of living or our society that we were unaware of or preferred not to see. So I just add those as perhaps ways in which shock can open us to greater perception and vision.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, John Ban Yan. Thinking about the shock therapy, I kind of throw up a kind of the analogy. Say we have a clean pot. It's like out with the nature. But each of us, our pot is not clean, but it got like a layer of, I say, wet dirt or wet, surrounding the pot. So shock therapy is like we strike on the pot, some of the dirt's gonna fall off. So people in the past, that layer of dirt is fairly thin. So the master, when he sees a person with a pot with a fairly thin layer of dirt, he uses shock therapy, strike the pot, and all the dirt falls off, and the person realized the truth. But in today's society, probably our wet dirt on the pot is fairly thick. So
Yes.
when we strike the pot, some of the dirt fell off, but they're still fairly thick. Depending on the person. Some dirt fell out and some of the pot surface exposed. And if we're practicing awareness, we'll see that. The person that doesn't practice awareness won't see that, and other dirt's going to keep covering it up. So our meditation is that we try to thinner that layer of dirt on the pot. And if a master seeing a person that reached some stage, then he used skillful means, strike the pot, and then all the dirt fall off. Shut by now.
Thank you, John. That was a wonderful analogy, and I want to use it to ask a question of Ruth. When you're talking about a pot that is covered, surrounded by all this dried mud that is attached to it, and it will be hard nowadays to strike this mud off of it because it's too thick and solid, so to speak. So, Ruth, we're talking about words, you're talking about language and how ideas and these perceptions, we allow them to create our lives. And so how would John's analogy be used to to kind of delucidate some, insight into that, into your.
Right. It's a beautiful analogy. Thank you, John. And the mud is, from what I came to understand in Lin Chi, that mud that surrounds the pot is language. They are the words that we construct our reality with. And the idea of the shock, I mean, yeah, how often do we, I mean, the expression we have was, I was left speechless. And that expression right there comes from a daily shock. It comes from that metaphorical stick. And I'm loving this idea that the stick and the shouting has become kind of like a metaphor now for a rude awakening, right? From having the rug pulled out from underneath us. You know, we have to reestablish an equilibrium, and we have to let that mud of language and preconceived notions fall away from the pot, so that the beauty of the pot, the emptiness within us can shine. So yeah, it's just, I'm loving how all this is weaving together with the idea of dropping off our fetters, like Peter spoke of, and the daily metaphors of that stick. And like many of us have said, we have those all the time. I know when I started studying Buddhism, oh my gosh, every time I thought I had my footing, something I read pulled the rug right out from underneath me. In other words, the stick hit the pot and the mud, more mud fell away. And, you know, I was feeling very vulnerable and very exposed until I realized that that which was being exposed was my emptiness, was my Bodhi nature. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Anyone? Oh,
Res-
Conrad?
res- Thank you. Respected Thai, dear Sangha, thank you for having me today. And because of this practice and looking deeply, the shocks for me now are just perhaps seeing the miracle in a flower, seeing the emptiness, seeing the sun and seeing the air and seeing the water. These are shocking miracles. And to shock, you have to be shocked by something, the subject and object. So by seeing the flower, by seeing the person you love, by seeing deeply into the person you love, the emptiness, this to me is very shocking. And it's these beautiful miracles that allow me to continue to just look deeply within this practice. And the other question, what was Dave's question about? The path, being on the path or not on the path. To me, I think all of this occurs in our mind when we're meditating, whether we're mindful or forgetful. When we're mindful, we're on the path. When we're forgetful, we're not on the path. It doesn't need to be a physical leaving, but it all happens within, as within all of our reality happens within our mind. So the path or not being on the path happens within our mind. And regarding thoughts and words and phrases, or no thoughts or no words or phrases, that to me spoke of the historical versus the ultimate dimension, because when we have words and thoughts and actions, these are our continuation. And that's our continuation from the historical dimension. But now to have no thoughts and no words and no actions, now we've entered the ultimate dimension as the water enters the ocean. And that's what I felt about those questions. And thank you for having me today. Conrad, bowing out.
Ruth bowing in. Thank you, Conrad. Yeah, that was beautiful. And the question I had about, the comment I had about creating or allowing words to become sort of our belief in reality is just that. Yes, and when we do that, what we wind up doing is kind of a deification of the conventional and the historic reality, and really believing in it. But when we allow the words to drop out, and you said that beautifully, when we allow the words to fall away, then we do see the ultimate, we do see the emptiness, we do see the dirty nature. But they're clouded by our reliance on, and I use the idea of the deification of language as being reality itself. Where, of course, it clouds it rather than reveals it.
Craig bowing in, just had a fast comment, more or less regarding the language as God. But one of the things that that really struck me in most of the readings in this book was, well, we see that in other teachings, but I've never seen it more strongly than with Lin Ji, where everything, all of our thoughts are all only expedient means, and nothing should be held on to. Everything is upaya. So all of this mud that we're kind of accreting with our thoughts and words and everything, may work for a given circumstance, but it's nothing that's going to necessarily work down the road. And so you have to be able to let go of it at the drop of a hat. So I guess the trick is knowing, what that drop of the hat actually is. But I appreciated the teaching. So thank you. Craig bowing out.
So we have 5 minutes, actually 4 minutes to for any additional comments. We have a number of us that have not expressed our thoughts. If you wish to do that, we have some time. So, floor is open.
John Bang here. In respect to path, no path, I think we have a saying that don't judge the book by its cover. So it's really the contents that matters. And in the Buddhist scriptures, we're thinking about like the Vimalakirti. So he appears like a normal lay person, but his practice is very deep. Even all the great 10 disciples of Buddha encounters him and couldn't, answer to his challenge because of the way he practiced. And in Tibetan, there's an example of Milarepa. People see him sleeping all the time. They thought that he's not practiced, but actually he's contemplating. And during one of the debates, he blow off everybody else. So I think it's just the contents that matter, the form outside. If you practice well and you got a beautiful form, that's great. But the beautiful form outside is not that way. It's just the content inside. Shanbai.
I can share a couple of quotes that have been meaningful to me. The first one comes from a document, and actually I have it in PDF form. It's called Ancient Poems of Ancient Vietnamese Zen Masters, and it covers the poems themselves of a long line of Vietnamese Zen Masters. Along with each poem, there's commentary. So this is one of the commentaries. The three studies, discipline, meditation, and wisdom, say nothing about koan practice. It's true that the Buddha did not teach the koan practice. Also, many Zen monasteries these days do not teach the koan practice. But Zen is life, and life is full of koans. Actually, you are facing koans anywhere and anytime. Sometimes someone calls your name, and you suddenly see that you have no name. Sometimes you watch a mountain and suddenly see that you are the mountain. Sometimes a flower falls in front of you and you suddenly see that you are already dead. Sometimes you are walking and suddenly see that every step is truly the emptiness. You do not need to do koan practice formally. However, koans are part of your life already. Koan is in your every breath. Feel that with your whole body and mind. I thought of that actually when Conrad shared a minute ago. And then another one from a modern book. The life situation becomes a koan when it has jolted you out of your usual linear way of thinking, out of the dualistic observer-observed modality that we are so conditioned to use. It becomes koan practice when you no longer think about the situation, but instead close the gap between subject and object, between yourself and what you are facing. Instead of contemplating the circumstances of your life, you plunge into the sound, smell, taste, and feel of it, and you stay with that in the face of the temptation to back away into the safe zone of observation and commentary. Thoughts and feelings will probably swirl in the beginning, as they usually do when you first start to meditate, but eventually, with patience and steadfastness, a different kind of realization dawns, arising from the very marrow of things rather than from the superficial.
Thank you, Dave. Tay, would you like to tell us some final words before we do the sharing of the merits? You need to unmute, Tay.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here today. And at the beginning, I mentioned about the COVID, and I think we would have some time to discuss about this project. It's a way to show our gratitude to our Buddha, our teachers in those two countries, and also the way for us to practice compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tay. Unless anyone has a burning desire to share something, we go to the sharing of the merits before we, and after that, we just do announcements. Are we good? All right. Thank you.